Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Civil War broke out.
Good question. Hey guys, History Matters. Original link to the video, top of the description. I had a bloody nose, so I hope it's fine. Original link to the video, top of the description from History Matters. My name's Connor, if you're new. I'm from the US, as you probably know. Preemptive like. Do I have... I'm sure a lot of different countries just... I mean, America didn't become a serious big power until, like, maybe World War One, after World War One, something like that. So I'm assuming it was seen by a lot of other powers in the world, like in Europe, as a conflict that they could see how they could benefit from it. And I'm assuming it's along those lines. Let's go.
It shouldn't surprise you that when the American Civil War broke out, it was pretty big news all over the world. But how did the rest of the world react? Civil War broke out, it was pretty big news all over
Amateurs, Chinese ambassador.
the world. But how did the rest of the world react to the American Civil War? And did they plan to do anything about it? So before starting, it's important to know that the USA wasn't seen by many of the world's nations at this time as a major player. A rising star for certain, but the USA wasn't seen as being equal to Europe's great powers, not even Austria. As such, many leaders saw the American Civil War as being a bit of a sideshow to events in Europe at the time, like the wars in the Italian peninsula or that time that the Danish provoked Prussia into a war. Europe's major players sent observers to the USA to see what tactics and technologies were being used, and they were, frankly, not impressed with the quality of warring going on. As for reaction, starting with the USA's neighbor to the south, Mexico.
So if we were to take our armies during the Civil War times over in Europe to fight, it would not even be close, is what I'm understanding. Like, we would not stand a chance.
Mexico, its government's going on. As for reaction, starting with the USA's neighbor to the south, Mexico, its government's initial reaction was one of awkward silence. It had just finished its own civil war, and due to its previous war with the USA, there was no love lost. Not that it had much time to think about it, since in late 1861 the French invaded, and so they'd spend the rest of the war having their own problems. As for the north, Canada was a series of British imperial domains.
I gotta learn more about that. As Napoleon III, right? Why Canada? I mean, why Mexico?
At this point having their own problems. As for the north, Canada was a series of British imperial domains at this point, and as such its foreign policy was determined in London. That said, the people of Canada were firmly in the camp of the Union, and many thousands of volunteers went south to fight against the Confederacy. Whereas to the British, the American Civil War was seen as a surprise and one which complicated Britain's foreign policy. You see, Britain imported a lot of cotton from the now Confederate States, and given that many parts of the country financially depended on them, the British were keen to see the war end quickly for economic reasons. Now, this didn't have to be a Union win, and British shipyards produced several warships for the Confederate States. The Confederacy hoped that Britain would recognise its independence, which would likely lead France to do the same and would strengthen its position diplomatically. Britain never did this, though, because it didn't want the United States to invade Canada. Wars were expensive, and the overwhelming majority of the British public supported the Union.
Well, if you wanted the war to end quickly, I mean, they must have seen the North as the more capable power in the American conflict, you know, the Union. And so why would you supply the South with those ships? I understand it's the cotton, right, that they need and want, but I feel like getting the war over with would restart the cotton producing and help you out that way.
Invade Canada, wars were expensive, and the overwhelming majority of the British public supported the Union, especially when the cause of the war moved from restoring the Union to abolishing slavery. And over the years, many thousands of people living in the British Isles, overwhelmingly Irish, went to the US to fight for the Union. Thus, the Confederacy got little help. As for the French, its reaction was the same as the Austrians, that these developed...
Guys, slavery is one of those things in history where... You know the common thing, which I agree with mostly, is that, like, you can't use your current day judgments or concepts of morality or your current day. You can't use the hindsight living in the present. I can't talk to judge everyone, you know, on things in the past, especially the further back you go. But slavery is one of those things where it's like, if you were, I don't care if you were in ancient Rome or you were in the Middle Ages or whatever, like you're going to see that and be like, yeah, that you're owning another person. And so what made it so that in the 1800s, people started to really take that into account, the moral question of slavery? Is it that, like, finally in the 1800s, people in European countries just, like, reached a level of general prosperity for a lot of citizens to the point where they could finally, like, they had time to care about these things? It's like, why did it take until the 1800s for a question of slavery to have such an effect on how you would support another country in war when they're, you know, pro or anti-slavery? Does that make sense? I hope I made sense there, because it's an interesting question to me.
Well, for the French, its reaction was the same as the Austrians, that these developments were a welcome surprise. It allowed Franco-Austrian intervention in Mexico so that Maximilian Habsburg could be placed on the throne there to increase their influence in the New World, and also to give back the money that Mexico was refusing to pay its creditors.
Interesting. So France and Spain just full-on wanted to just conquer Mexico.
An intervention in Mexico so that Maximilian Habsburg could be placed on the throne there to increase their influence in the New World, and also to give back the money that Mexico was refusing to pay its creditors.
So they wanted to essentially have, like, their own Canada, like what Canada was to the British. Like, they wanted Mexico to be their kind of own puppet.
Both nations had unofficial contact with the Confederacy over mutual recognition, yet neither France nor Austria did anything because they knew it would mean war with the United States. Whereas Prussia's reaction to the outbreak of the Civil War wasn't one of shock, but that it brought with it opportunity. Despite being disappointed with the quality of their troops and tactics, Prussia favoured the Union. Prussia was itself a very conservative state, but its leadership knew that acting against the Union would negatively impact its image amongst the very pro-Union German-speaking world, which, as you'll know, it was trying to unite, and so by pushing itself as a firm ally of abolitionism and the Union, Prussia's image amongst the German-speaking world could be improved with very little effort. And what about Russia? American leadership was bolstered by a large Russian fleet sailing to their coast, which they hoped would help them blockade the Confederacy, but fun fact, no. The fleet was actually there to stop itself from being caged up in the Baltic Sea in case of war with Britain, as tensions between the two were high. Tsar Alexander II was an outspoken ally of Lincoln and pushed for the total destruction of the Confederacy. And as for the Ottoman reaction, they were overwhelmingly pro-Union. They signed a trade deal with the Union, banned Confederate ships from their waters, and also made a ton of money since they were the second best source of cotton for European markets and their main competitor had just been blockaded. All in all, the world's reaction to the outbreak of the Civil War was one of initial surprise, followed by it asking itself, how can this benefit me? I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching.
Thank you for making. That sounds par for the course. Standard. But I do find it interesting how, I'm sure communication has a lot to do with it. I know that I was watching a video the other day. I wasn't reacting to it. I was just watching it on my own, about the Crimean War, and how the Crimean War, it was like the first big war where you had semi-instant communication. Like you could now get, and it, like you had a camera. You were able to take photos, and just, you know, soldiers could write back to their loved ones very much more quickly. And, you know, I think it was the telegram or something, which rather than months, it now took a day or something to get news back. And so I feel like the 1800s was the real dawn of, like, the image of war is open for the, what did I just do? Was
history section, Danny.
The image of war now had to be taken into account of the people engaging in the war, right? And so I think that's a super interesting how that's the case, you know. Very interesting. Pretty much what I expected broadly, that they'd, you know, just how does this help me? But I definitely learned some stuff too. So love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below if I said anything wrong or whatever. Would love to see your comments, and hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.